Jake Miller wiped the grease off his hands with an old rag that had seen better days. His repair shop sat at the far edge of Frontier Station Kedge, where the rent was cheap and the customers were desperate. He specialized in the kind of work that made corporate mechanics shake their heads and walk away. Old cargo haulers with dying engines. Mining rigs held together by prayer and duct tape. If it was broken and nobody else would fix it, people came to Jake. The shop wasn't much to look at. Tools scattered across workbenches. Half-finished projects piled in corners. The walls were stained with years of oil and welding burns. A coffee maker that barely worked sat on a crate, brewing something that tasted more like motor oil than actual coffee. But it was his, and he'd built it from nothing after leaving Earth. That afternoon started like any other. Jake was elbow-deep in a cargo ship's engine, cursing at a stubborn fuel line, when he heard something scraping across the floor outside. The sound was slow and labored, like someone dragging a heavy load. The door hissed open. Jake looked up and felt his stomach tighten. A Valerian was pulling himself across the threshold. The alien's upper body was powerful, built like a warrior. But his lower half was withered and useless, dragging behind him like dead weight. Burned scars covered his carapace in jagged patterns. This wasn't someone who'd been born this way. This was someone who'd been broken. Jake set down his wrench and walked over. The Valerian stopped, breathing hard from the effort of moving. His compound eyes looked up at Jake with an expression that needed no translation. It was the look of someone who'd lost everything. "You fix ships?" the alien asked. His translator rendered the words in flat, mechanical English. "That's what the sign says," Jake replied, keeping his voice gentle. "What can I do for you?" The Valerian pulled himself up using Jake's workbench. Up close, Jake could see more details. The scars weren't just on his legs. They covered his entire lower body. Whatever had happened to him had been catastrophic. "My name is Rax," the alien said. "I was a pilot. Before." Jake nodded, understanding the weight of that single word. Before. Before the injury. Before everything changed. Rax explained his situation, and Jake listened without interrupting. The Valerian had been flying a combat mission when enemy fire tore through his ship. The explosion had saved his life but destroyed his ability to walk, to pilot, to do anything that had given his life meaning. He tried everything. Standard mobility chairs didn't work with Valerian biology. Their nervous systems were too different from most species. The neural pathways didn't line up. Custom solutions existed, Rax said, but they cost more money than he'd earn in a lifetime. He'd visited every shop on the station. Every mechanic had given him the same answer. Too expensive. Too complicated. Too risky. Come back when you have money. "I accepted that this is my life now," Rax said quietly. His voice carried the hollow tone of someone who'd given up. "I came here because someone said you take impossible jobs. But I understand if you cannot help." Jake didn't respond right away. He looked at Rax, really looked at him. He saw the proud set of his shoulders despite everything. He saw the worn flight jacket the alien still wore, patches from old missions stitched across the fabric. He saw someone who'd served and sacrificed and been thrown away when he was no longer useful. Jake's eyes drifted to the back corner of his shop. There sat a pile of salvaged parts he'd been collecting for months. Scrapped fighter components. Broken medical equipment. Pieces of ships that had been torn apart and sold for scrap. Most people saw junk. Jake saw possibilities. He'd learned something during his years fixing the unfixable. Sometimes the answer wasn't in following the rules or doing things the proper way. Sometimes you had to improvise. Get creative. Build something new from broken pieces. "Come back in 2 weeks, Jake said. Rax's expression shifted to confusion. 2 weeks? For what? "Just trust me," Jake said. 2 weeks. Can you do that?" The alien stared at him for a long moment. Jake could see the war between hope and doubt playing out behind those compound eyes. Hope was dangerous when you'd been disappointed so many times. But Rax finally nodded. 2 weeks, he agreed. Jake helped him to the door. Watched him drag himself back down the corridor. Watched until the alien disappeared around a corner. Then Jake turned back to his shop. He looked at that pile of salvage parts. His mind was already racing, calculating, planning. What he was thinking about doing was probably illegal in 6 different ways. It definitely violated safety regulations. Any sane mechanic would say it was impossible. Good thing Jake had never been particularly sane. He grabbed his toolbox and walked over to the salvage pile. Time to get to work. Jake spent the first 3 hours just staring at the pile of parts, drinking terrible coffee and sketching ideas on old paper. His AI assistant kept chirping helpful suggestions about proper engineering protocols. Jake muted it. This wasn't the kind of problem you solved with protocols. The clock became meaningless. Jake worked through nights until dawn light filtered through the dirty windows. He'd catch a few hours of sleep on the worn couch in his office, then wake up and dive back in. His beard grew scraggly. His clothes smelled like metal and sweat. He stopped answering calls from friends asking if he was still alive. He started with 3 junked fighter ships that had been gathering dust for months. The frames were shot, but their internal systems still had life in them. Jake cut them apart with plasma torches, sparks flying across the shop floor. He pulled out navigation computers, stabilizers, and power cores. Anything that still functioned got added to the growing pile of useful components. The medical pod was trickier. It had been damaged in a station accident, its healing functions fried beyond repair. But buried inside was a neural interface system designed to read biological signals. Jake spent 2 full days just figuring out how it worked. The documentation was in 3 different alien languages, and half of it was missing. What Jake was building in his mind wasn't like anything he'd seen before. Not a wheelchair. Not a vehicle. Something in between. A ship so small it would wrap around Rax's body like a second skin. The Valerian's useless legs wouldn't matter if the ship itself became his legs. His means of movement. His freedom. The hull took shape slowly. Jake welded pieces together, working from rough sketches he'd drawn. It looked crude at first, just metal sheets forming a basic shell. But Jake kept refining it, smoothing edges, reinforcing weak points. The ship needed to be small enough to navigate tight spaces but strong enough to protect its pilot. Inside, Jake installed the navigation systems from the fighters. He mounted microthrusters in strategic positions, tiny engines salvaged from a racing drone he'd fixed last year. The owner had never come back for it. Their loss became Rax's gain. Those little thrusters could provide incredible maneuverability if wired correctly. The Neuralink crown was the biggest gamble. Jake had salvaged it years ago from a crashed luxury yacht. The original owner had used it to control ship systems with just thoughts. It was expensive tech, far beyond what Jake could normally afford. He kept it hidden, knowing someday it might be useful. Integrating it into the mini-ship took careful work. Jake had to modify the connections to account for Valerian biology. He pulled up every medical file he could find on Valerian nervous systems, studying nerve patterns and brain structures. He made his best guess and hoped it would work. If he got it wrong, the crown might not connect at all. Or worse, it could cause Rax pain. His AI assistant started throwing warnings around day 9. Safety violations. Unlicensed medical modifications. Improper shielding. Thruster placement outside standard parameters. The list went on and on. Jake silenced every alert. He knew the risks. He also knew that following every rule meant Rax would never fly again. The shield generator almost broke him. He'd pulled it from a cargo hauler, and the thing was designed for something 10 times larger. Making it work on a mini-ship required completely rewiring the power distribution. Jake burned his hand twice and nearly electrocuted himself once. But eventually he got it functioning. The shield wouldn't stop a military weapon, but it would protect against debris and minor collisions. By day 13, Jake had stopped leaving the shop entirely. He tested each system individually. Thrusters fired correctly. Power flowed without overloads. The neural crown initialized without errors. But would it all work together? Day 14 arrived. Jake hadn't slept in 20 hours. His hands shook from exhaustion and too much coffee. The mini-ship sat in the center of his garage, looking like nothing else in the galaxy. Rough around the edges. Clearly handmade. But functional. Jake heard the scraping sound outside his door. Rax had returned. The Valerian pulled himself inside and stopped. His eyes locked onto the ship. For a long moment he just stared. "What is that?" Rax asked quietly. "Something for you," Jake said. "Come look." Jake explained what he'd built. How the neural crown would read Rax's thoughts and translate them into movement. How the thrusters would give him flight. How the ship would become an extension of his own body. Rax reached out with a shaking hand and touched the hull. His fingers traced the welded seams, the mounted thrusters, the smooth metal surfaces. Jake could see tears forming in the alien's compound eyes. "This is for me?" Rax whispered. "You built this for me?" "Try it out," Jake said, opening the entry hatch. Rax pulled himself up and climbed inside. The ship fitted around him perfectly. Jake had measured carefully. The neural crown settled onto Rax's head, and lights flickered across the control panel. For a moment nothing happened. Then the mini-ship hummed to life. It lifted smoothly off the garage floor, hovering 2 feet in the air. Rax's laugh echoed through the shop, pure and joyful. The ship moved forward, backward, spun in place. Every movement was smooth and natural, controlled by thought alone. Tears ran down Rax's face as he flew circles around the garage. Not tears of sadness this time. These were tears of freedom. When Rax finally landed, he climbed out and faced Jake. "How much?" he asked. "Name your price." Jake calculated the raw materials. "Metal. Wire. Power cells. 2,000 credits," he said. "For parts." Rax tried to argue. Tried to pay 10 times that amount. But Jake refused to budge. This wasn't about money. It never had been. 5 days passed in peaceful routine. Jake fixed a broken hauler for a trader. Replaced coolant lines on a mining rig. Drank his terrible coffee. Everything felt normal. Then the alarm started screaming. Jake looked up from the engine he was working on. Station-wide alarms only went off for emergencies. Fires. Hull breaches. Or incoming military vessels. His shop's communication panel crackled to life. "Attention all station personnel. Valerian military cruiser approaching. Stand by for docking procedures. Repeat, Valerian military cruiser approaching." Jake's wrench slipped from his hand and clattered on the floor. Military cruisers didn't just visit places like Kedge Station. This was a backwater trading post. Nothing important happened here. Through his grimy window, Jake could see people in the corridor outside starting to panic. Shop owners rushed to hide questionable goods. Traders grabbed merchandise that might have sketchy import documentation. Everyone with something to hide was hiding it fast. Jake looked around his shop. At the tools scattered everywhere. At the half-legal modifications he'd made to various ships. At his workbench where he'd built Rax's mini-ship just days ago. His stomach twisted into knots. That ship. The Neuralink crown he'd installed without proper licensing. The medical modifications he'd made without certification. The safety regulations he'd ignored. If the military was here because of that, he was finished. They'd shut down his shop. Maybe arrest him. At minimum, he'd lose everything he'd built. But running wouldn't help. Where would he go? The shop was his life. Jake forced himself to stay calm. He picked up his wrench and went back to work on the engine. His hands shook slightly, but he kept them busy. Maybe the military wasn't here for him at all. Maybe this was about something else entirely. The station shuddered slightly as the massive warship docked. Jake had seen Valerian cruisers before, but never up close. They were enormous vessels, designed to carry hundreds of warriors and enough firepower to level a small moon. Minutes passed like hours. Jake pretended to work, but he wasn't really seeing the engine in front of him. His mind raced through possibilities. Should he lawyer up? Did he even know any lawyers? Could he claim ignorance about the regulations? Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Multiple sets. Moving with military precision. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. The footsteps were getting closer. Coming straight toward his shop. The door to his garage slid open with a hiss. Valerian war priests flooded into his shop. 6 of them, wearing ceremonial armor that gleamed under the harsh lights. These weren't regular soldiers. War priests were elite warriors, the best of the best. Their armor was covered in honor markings that told stories of battles won and enemies defeated. Each carried a plasma rifle humming with barely contained energy. The weapons weren't pointed at Jake, but they weren't exactly lowered either. Jake stood frozen, the wrench still in his hand. His mouth went dry. Behind the war priests, another figure entered. This Valerian was bigger than the others, his armor more elaborate. Scars covered his carapace, running in thick ridges across his neck and shoulders. His eyes held the hard look of someone who'd seen too much combat and survived it all. The gold markings on his armor marked him as High Commander. This wasn't just any officer. This was someone who commanded entire fleets. "Jake Miller?" The commander's voice rumbled through a translator. "That's me," Jake managed to say. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I am High Commander Vex of the Valerian Third Fleet." The alien studied Jake with those hard eyes. "We need to speak about Rax." Jake's stomach dropped through the floor. This was it. He was done for. "Look, I know I violated some regulations." Jake started talking fast. "But Rax needed help and nobody else would." Commander Vex held up a clawed hand, silencing him. The massive warrior stepped forward. His war priests moved with him, their footsteps thundering on the garage floor. Jake braced himself for arrest. For handcuffs or whatever the Valerian equivalent was. His mind was already calculating how much bail might cost. Then Commander Vex did something that made Jake's brain stop working entirely. The High Commander lowered himself to one knee. One by one, Every war priest in the garage followed their commander's lead. 6 elite warriors, trained killers in ceremonial armor, knelt before a human mechanic in a greasy shop. Jake stood there, wrench still in hand, completely frozen. His mouth opened but no words came out. This wasn't how arrests worked. This wasn't how anything worked. "You saved the son of my brother in arms?" Commander Vex said. His voice had changed. The hard military edge was gone, replaced by something that sounded like emotion. Raw, genuine emotion. "You returned honor to one our society had abandoned." Jake's brain struggled to process what was happening. "I just built him a ship," he said weakly. "That's all. Just a ship." The commander's mandibles clicked together in a way that might have been a laugh. But there was no humor in his eyes. Only something deeper. Respect maybe. Or gratitude. "Human," Commander Vex said slowly, "you do not understand what you have done." Commander Vex rose to his full height, towering over Jake by at least 2 feet. The war priests remained kneeling, their heads bowed in a show of respect Jake didn't understand. "Let me tell you about Rax," the commander began. His voice carried the weight of old pain. "He was one of our finest pilots. Fast, fearless. He could thread a fighter through asteroid fields that would make veteran pilots turn back. We called him the Shadow because enemy sensors could never track him." Jake listened, still holding that wrench like it might protect him somehow. 3 years ago, Rax's squadron was ambushed during a patrol near the Outer Rim. Enemy ships outnumbered them 5 to 1. Most of his squad was cut down in the first minutes. Rax stayed behind, providing cover so 2 damaged fighters could escape. He saved 6 lives that day. The commander's mandibles twitched. The enemy got him. Plasma fire tore through his cockpit. Should have killed him instantly. Somehow he survived long enough for rescue. But the damage was done. His spine was shattered. His legs were gone. Everything below his waist was just dead tissue. Jake felt his chest tighten. He'd known Rax had been injured badly, but hearing the details made it real in a different way. "We gave him the best medical care our civilization could offer," Vex continued. "Regeneration therapy. Cybernetic implants. Nothing worked. Valerian biology is difficult. Our nervous systems don't heal like other species." The doctors finally said there was nothing more they could do. The commander paused, his scarred face hardening. "In our culture, a warrior who cannot serve has no purpose. We are raised from birth to believe that combat defines our worth. A pilot who cannot fly is not a pilot. A warrior who cannot fight is not a warrior." Jake wanted to say something about how wrong that sounded, but he kept quiet. "Rax tried to adapt," Vex said. "He worked desk assignments. Trained new recruits using simulators. But every day he could see the pity in their eyes. The way they looked at him as something broken. Something less than what he had been." The commander's voice dropped lower. 6 weeks ago, Rax informed his unit commander that he was undertaking the silence. It is an old ritual. When a warrior has lost their honor, lost their ability to serve, they end their own life in a ceremony. It is considered honorable. Expected even. Jake felt sick. "That's insane." "That is our way," Vex replied without emotion. "Rax's commander reported this to me. I am brother-in-arms to Rax's blood uncle. We served together for 20 years. I tried to talk Rax out of it, but he had made his choice. He disappeared before the ceremony could take place. We thought he had gone somewhere private to perform the silence alone." The commander gestured to one of his war priests. The warrior pulled out a data pad and handed it to Jake. The screen showed sensor readings. Flight paths. A small ship signature moving through an asteroid field with impossible precision. "We detected this 5 days ago," Vex explained. "Our sensors picked up a vessel performing maneuvers that only a highly skilled pilot could execute. When we traced the signature we found Rax. Alive. Flying." Jake looked at the data. The flight patterns were beautiful, weaving through space rocks with perfect timing. "We thought our sensors were malfunctioning," the commander said. "Disabled pilots do not fly. It is impossible." Yet there was Rax, performing combat drills in a ship that should not exist. Vex took the data pad back. "We brought him aboard our cruiser. Demanded to know what had happened. He told us about a human mechanic on Kedge Station. Said you looked at him and saw someone worth saving instead of something broken." The war priests finally rose to their feet, but they kept their weapons lowered in a sign of respect. "We studied your ship," Commander Vex continued. "Our engineers have been analyzing it for 3 days. They say what you built should be impossible. The neural integration alone should require years of research, teams of specialists, and funding in the millions. You did it in 2 weeks with salvaged parts and no formal training in Valerian biology. Jake shrugged uncomfortably. I just improvised. Figured it out as I went. Exactly, Vex said. Our engineers follow protocols, procedures, rules. They would never attempt what you did because regulations say it cannot be done. But you ignored the rules and built something our entire civilization said was impossible. The commander stepped closer. Rax's story has spread throughout our fleets. Other wounded veterans are asking about you. Warriors who were preparing for the silence now have hope. You have challenged everything our culture believes about honor and worth. Vex placed a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. Come work for the Valerian military. We will give you a fully equipped research facility, a team of engineers, access to any technology you need. Name your price. Whatever you want, it is yours. Jake looked around his cramped garage, at the stained walls and scattered tools, at the coffee maker that barely worked, at the worn couch where he slept when projects ran late. This shop wasn't much, but it was his. He took a deep breath. Jake looked at Commander Vex's expectant face. The offer was incredible. A real research facility with proper equipment. A team of trained engineers. Funding that would let him work on projects without worrying about the cost of materials. Any mechanic in the galaxy would jump at this opportunity. But Jake wasn't any mechanic. I appreciate the offer, Commander, Jake said carefully. I really do. But I'm going to stay here. The garage fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the metal floor. The war priests looked at each other in confusion. Commander Vex's mandibles stopped moving entirely, frozen in surprise. Nobody refused the Valerian military. Not when they made an offer like this. It simply didn't happen. You are refusing? Vex asked slowly, like he needed to make sure he'd understood correctly. Yeah, Jake said. He set down his wrench and wiped his hands on his pants. Look, I didn't help Rax because I wanted something in return. I helped him because he walked through that door needing help and I was able to give it. He gestured around his cramped, oil-stained shop. See, there are people out here that fall through the cracks. Humans, aliens, whatever species they are. They can't afford the fancy corporate repair shops with their clean floors and expensive hourly rates. Those places take one look at someone like Rax and see a project that'll cost too much and take too long. Not worth their time. Jake walked over to his window and looked out at the station corridor. Kedge Station isn't a nice place. It's where people end up when they've got nowhere else to go. Traders barely making enough to keep their ships running. Miners who work for companies that don't care if they live or die. Refugees from wars they didn't start. These are the people who come to my shop. One of the war priests shifted uncomfortably. Commander Vex remained perfectly still, listening. If I go work for your military, I'll be in some fancy facility on a military base, Jake continued. I'll have all the resources I need, sure. But I won't be here. And the next time someone like Rax shows up with a problem nobody else will fix, my door will be locked. My shop will be closed. Jake turned back to face the commander. You want to honor me? Then do this. Tell every wounded veteran in your fleets about this place. Tell every disabled pilot, every injured warrior, every person your society has given up on. Tell them about the garage on Kedge Station. Tell them there's a human here who doesn't quit on people just because fixing them is hard. His voice grew stronger. Tell them humans don't care about protocols and procedures when someone needs help. Tell them we look at impossible problems and figure out solutions anyway. Tell them that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Commander Vex stared at Jake for a long moment. The silence stretched out. Jake wondered if he'd just made a huge mistake. Maybe he'd insulted the commander. Maybe refusing the offer was some kind of cultural offense. Then Vex's mandibles spread wide and what Jake had learned was a Valerian smile. But this smile was different from before. It held genuine warmth. Your species is completely illogical, the commander said. His voice carried something that might have been admiration. Inefficient. You make decisions based on emotion rather than practical benefit. You help people even when it costs you personally. Vex stepped forward and placed both of his clawed hands on Jake's shoulders. The gesture felt formal, important. Perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs, the commander finished. What happened next surprised Jake more than anything else that day. Commander Vex pulled out his own data pad and began typing rapidly. I cannot force you to work for the military, he said. But I can do something else. Within an hour, documents were filed and approved. The Valerian military officially designated Jake's garage as an authorized research site. That single designation changed everything. It meant Jake could legally access technology that was normally restricted. Neuralink crowns, advanced medical equipment, military-grade components. All of it became available to him. They assigned 2 Valerian engineers to the station, not to supervise Jake but to learn from him. Watch how the human works, Vex told them. Learn to think like he does. The consulting fee they paid Jake was generous enough that he could buy the empty building next door. More space for projects. Room to help more people. Commander Vex and his war priests left that evening. But before he departed, Vex clasped Jake's shoulder one last time. The word is already spreading, he said. Be ready. Ready didn't begin to cover it. Within 2 weeks, the first wounded veteran arrived from 3 sectors away. A Valerian pilot with burns covering half his body. Then came a human soldier who'd lost both arms. An alien trader whose species Jake had never even seen before, paralyzed by a mining accident. They kept coming. Some could pay. Some couldn't. Jake helped them all. He trained other mechanics in his techniques. Humans and aliens both, anyone willing to learn that rules were meant to be broken when lives were at stake. His shop became something more than just a repair garage. It became a place where the galaxy's forgotten people found hope. The shop still smelled like oil and bad coffee. The walls were still stained. The equipment was still a mix of salvaged junk and barely functional tools. But now it smelled like something else too. Something that couldn't be measured or quantified. Oh. And somewhere in the asteroid belt, Rax performed practice runs in his impossible little ship. Flying free. Flying whole. Living proof that humans fix things everyone else had written off as broken forever.